I should have known something was wrong the moment my husband smiled before the lawyer even opened the file. Ethan Whitmore never smiled in rooms like that. Not unless he believed he had already won. Rain slid down the tall glass windows of Margaret Hayes's office, turning the Manhattan skyline into a blur of gray steel and yellow lights. The conference table between us looked too polished, too perfect, the kind of table where people signed away homes, marriages, and futures without raising their voices. I sat at the far end in a simple cream dress I had ironed twice that morning, my hands folded over a sealed envelope Eleanor Whitmore had given me before she died. Across from me, Ethan leaned back in his navy suit, calm as a man waiting for a bill he knew someone else would pay. His sister Vanessa sat beside him, tapping a gold pin against her folder, her diamond bracelet flashing every time the lightning flickered outside. She did not look at me like family. She looked at me like a stain the housekeeper had missed. "Grace," she said softly, "sweet enough for strangers, sharp enough for me. After today, this will all be much easier for everyone." I did not answer. My throat felt tight, but I kept my chin level. That was one thing my mother had taught me before the hospital bills took everything else. Never let rich people see you shrinking. Margaret Hayes, the Whitmore family lawyer, adjusted her glasses and placed a brown leather folder in the center of the table. She was in her late 50s, silver-haired, careful, and impossible to rush. She had served the Whitmores for more than 30 years, long enough to know which smiles were grief and which were greed. "We are here," she began, "for the reading of Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore's final instructions regarding the Whitmore estate." Ethan's smile deepened just a little. It was not warm. It was practiced. 6 months earlier, he had asked me to marry him like he was offering a business loan. 6 months of appearances. 6 months of dinners, charity events, quiet hallways, separate bedrooms, and rules written in black ink. No emotions. No expectations. No public humiliation. That last line had been mine. I wrote it by hand before I signed. Ethan barely glanced at it then. But now, sitting in that office, with divorce papers waiting in Vanessa's folder and my suitcase already packed by the front door of the estate, I wondered if that single line had been the only honest thing in our marriage. Margaret turned a page. The paper made a small sound, but in that room it landed like a warning. 3 weeks before her passing, she continued, Mrs. Whitmore executed a legal transfer of ownership. Vanessa stopped tapping her pen. Ethan's smile held, but his eyes sharpened. "A transfer?" he asked. Margaret did not look at him. She looked at me. "Yes. The deed to the Whitmore estate, including the main residence, the east greenhouse, and the surrounding 12 acres, was transferred in full." My heartbeat thudded once hard. I stared at the folder, suddenly aware of the envelope under my palms, of the faint red wax seal Eleanor had pressed with shaking fingers. Ethan sat forward. "Transferred to whom?" Margaret lifted the deed, her voice steady enough to break a life clean in half. "The legal owner is Grace Miller Whitmore." For one perfect second nobody moved. The rain kept falling. The city kept glowing. Vanessa's pen slipped from her hand and clicked against the floor. Ethan's smile disappeared so completely it was as if someone had turned off a light behind his face. I could not breathe. I could not speak. All I could do was look at the man who had brought me there expecting to take everything from me and whisper, "What did you just say?" 6 months before that rainy morning in Margaret Hayes's office, I was not sitting across from lawyers or millionaires. I was standing behind the counter of my little flower shop in Queens, counting crumpled bills beside a cracked ceramic mug that said "Bloom Anyway." The shop was barely 600 square feet, squeezed between a laundromat and a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon before sunrise. It had belonged to my mother first, back when she still had the strength to carry buckets of roses from the delivery truck and laugh when petals stuck to her sweater. After she passed, the rent, the supplier invoices, and the last hospital statements arrived like they had been waiting at the door. I kept every envelope in a drawer under the register, hoping paper could not hurt me if I refused to open it. That morning, I had $23 in the cash box, 2 wedding consultations canceled, and a landlord who had already circled the 15th on the calendar in red marker. Then the phone rang. A woman from Whitmore Estates wanted emergency floral arrangements for a private investor dinner in Midtown. Same day. Full lobby installation. White orchids, calla lilies, hydrangeas, nothing too colorful, nothing too sentimental. Her words sounded expensive before she even mentioned the budget. I should have said no. I did not have the staff, the van, or the energy. But the number she offered could keep my shop alive another month. So I said yes with my heart pounding and my fingers crossed. By 6 that evening, I was in the marble lobby of a tower on 5th Avenue, wearing black pants, a white blouse, and sneakers hidden behind a rolling cart of flowers. Men in tailored suits moved around me like I was part of the furniture. Women with perfect hair stepped past buckets of stems without seeing who had arranged them. I was tying the last ribbon around a tall glass vase when a voice behind me said, "You are not using the roses." I turned and saw Ethan Whitmore for the first time. He was taller than I expected, with dark blonde hair, a sharp jaw, and the kind of calm expression people have when the room already belongs to them. I wiped my hands on my apron. "No, sir." The request was for clean, formal, and not too sentimental. His eyes moved from the flowers to me. "Roses are traditional. So are apologies," I said before I could stop myself. "But that does not mean they belong in every room." For a second I thought I had lost the job. Then his mouth almost curved, not quite a smile, but close enough to make me nervous. The event coordinator tried to slip me a cash tip afterward, more than the invoice itself, probably to make sure I disappeared quietly through the service entrance. I handed half of it back. "The order has already been paid in full," I told her. "I only take what I earned." That was when I noticed Ethan watching from across the lobby. Not impressed exactly. More like confused. As if honesty from someone with rent overdue did not fit into any category he understood. 2 days later he walked into my shop just before closing. Rainwater darkened the shoulders of his coat. He looked out of place between the carnations and the handwritten discount sign, like a skyscraper had wandered into a garden shed. "Grace Miller?" he asked. I held pruning shears in one hand and a stack of overdue notices in the other. "That depends on whether you are here to buy flowers or collect money." He looked at the envelopes, then back at me. "Neither." He placed a cream-colored card on the counter. "No bouquet. No small talk. Just my name written in black ink, and a dinner reservation at a restaurant I could never afford." "I have a proposal," he said. I almost laughed because men like Ethan Whitmore did not make proposals to women like me. They made offers, and somewhere inside every offer was a door that locked behind you. The restaurant on Ethan's card sat 40 stories above Columbus Circle, with windows so wide the whole city looked arranged for people who never worried about rent. I arrived 15 minutes early because my mother used to say punctuality was the only luxury poor people could afford. My black dress was borrowed from my neighbor, my heels pinched by the elevator, and the hostess looked at me twice before leading me to a private table near the glass. Ethan was already there, not with roses or candlelight, but with a leather folder placed neatly beside his untouched water. That folder told me more than his face did. This was not a date. It was a transaction wearing a white tablecloth. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing just long enough to be polite. "You said you had a proposal," I replied. "So propose." His eyes flickered, as if he was not used to being rushed by someone who sold tulips by the dozen. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. The first page was clean, formal, and cold. Temporary marriage agreement. 6 months. Public appearances as husband and wife. Separate private lives. Confidentiality. Financial compensation upon completion. Immediate settlement of my mother's remaining medical debt. Full payment of the flower shop lease for 1 year. My breath caught before I could hide it. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Men like Ethan made fortunes by noticing weakness and calling it timing. "My grandmother's trust requires me to demonstrate family stability before the board vote in December," he said. "I do not need romance. I need credibility. You need money. This solves both problems." I stared at the number printed near the bottom of the page. It was more than I had made in 3 years. Enough to clear every hospital bill, save the shop, and stop waking up at 3 in the morning with my chest tight from fear. The waiter came by with wine. Ethan declined for both of us without asking me. That small thing should have been warning enough. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you are decent under pressure. You do not chase attention. You have no public scandals. And you returned money you could have kept. So you want to rent my reputation." He paused. "I want to borrow your presence." That sounds nicer. It means the same thing. For the first time, something human crossed his face. Not guilt. Not yet. Maybe surprise. I read through the pages slowly while the city glittered beneath us. No children. No shared bank accounts. No claim to Whitmore assets. No expectation of affection. Attend dinners, charity events, and family functions. Smile when necessary. Leave quietly when finished. Each sentence felt like another brick in a wall being built around me. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a pen. Ethan leaned back, thinking I was ready to sign. Instead, I turned to the last page and wrote one line in the margin, pressing hard enough for the ink to almost tear the paper. No humiliation. Not in private. Not in public. Ethan looked at the words. That is unusual. So is marrying a stranger to impress a board. You understand this is business. I understand business, I said. My mother ran a flower shop for 28 years. She knew every customer by name, paid every invoice she could, and never once made someone feel small because they had less. If I do this, you do not get to treat me like a receipt you can fold and throw away. The room went quiet around us, though the restaurant was full. Ethan picked up the contract, read my line again, and signed beneath it without argument. Then he slid the pen back to me. My hand shook when I wrote Grace Miller on the page. Not because I believed in him. Not because I trusted the calm blue eyes watching me from across the table. I signed because grief had emptied my life, debt had cornered me, and sometimes survival arrives dressed as a mistake. When it was done, Ethan closed the folder and said, "The wedding will be private. Friday morning. City Hall. That's soon. The board meets in 2 weeks." Of course. Even the marriage had a deadline. I stood, my appetite gone, and looked out at the lights below. Somewhere down there was my little shop, my mother's mug, and a drawer full of envelopes that had finally stopped feeling heavier than my bones. Ethan walked me to the elevator. Just before the doors opened, he said, "Grace, this arrangement can be simple if we both remember what it is." I looked at him then, really looked at him, at the expensive suit, the controlled voice, the loneliness he wore so neatly it almost passed for confidence. "Simple things do not usually need 20 pages, I said. The elevator doors closed between us, and I held the signed copy against my chest like a life raft, not knowing it was also the first paper trail leading me straight into the heart of the Whitmore family's oldest secret. The wedding took less than 20 minutes, and somehow that made it feel even less real. There was no church, no music, no aisle lined with flowers, only a city clerk with tired eyes, a bouquet I had made myself before sunrise, and Ethan standing beside me in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car. He slid a plain gold band onto my finger without touching my hand longer than necessary. I said the words. He said the words. A witness from his legal team signed a form. Then it was done. I walked out of City Hall as Grace Miller Whitmore, a name that sounded like it belonged to someone taller, richer, and much better trained at pretending. Ethan's driver took us north, past streets I knew, then past streets I had only seen in movies, until the city thinned into iron gates, old trees, and driveways long enough to have their own weather. Whitmore Estate rose at the end of a curved road, pale stone and black shutters, with 12 acres of manicured lawn stretching behind it like a private park. It was beautiful in the way a museum is beautiful. Perfect. Expensive. Untouched by warmth. Ethan stepped out first. "You will have the East Suite," he said, as if assigning a conference room. "My room is in the West Wing. Staff already knows the arrangement." "The arrangement," I repeated. He looked at me, but only for a second. "It is better if expectations are clear." The front door opened before I could answer. Vanessa Whitmore stood in the foyer wearing winter white and a smile thin enough to cut paper. "There she is," she said. "Our temporary bride." My fingers tightened around the handle of my suitcase. Ethan said nothing. That silence told me exactly how alone I was going to be in that house. The foyer smelled like lemon polish and old money. Marble floors reflected the chandelier above, and every portrait on the wall seemed to stare at me like I had stepped into the wrong family history. A housekeeper named Mrs. Alvarez showed me to the East Suite, where fresh towels were stacked like hotel displays and a vase of white lilies sat on the dresser. They were expensive, flawless, and scentless. I almost laughed. Even the flowers here had learned not to feel too much. For the first few days, I moved through the estate carefully, trying not to disturb anything. Breakfast was served at 7. Dinner was formal unless Ethan was working late, which he almost always was. Vanessa appeared whenever she wanted, usually to remind me which fork belonged to which course or which donors preferred not to hear small business stories. The staff was polite but distant. Everyone had been told I was Mrs. Whitmore, and no one believed it meant anything. Then on my 4th afternoon, I wandered past the library and heard coughing from a room near the East Hall. The door was half open. Inside, Eleanor Whitmore sat in a wingback chair by the window, a wool blanket over her knees and a book resting unopened in her lap. She was smaller than I expected, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and pale in the soft afternoon light. "You must be Grace," she said. "Not Mrs. Whitmore. Not Ethan's wife." Grace. My own name sounded different in her voice. "I am sorry," I said. "I did not mean to intrude." "Nonsense. Everyone in this house intrudes. Very few apologize." I smiled before I could stop myself. She studied me, then looked at the lilies on the side table. "Did they choose those for you too?" "I think they choose everything here." "Then we must save you before the house swallows you whole." That was how it began. I started visiting Eleanor in the afternoons. Sometimes I brought tea. Sometimes I read to her. Sometimes we said nothing at all while rain moved over the windows. She told me the estate once had a greenhouse on the east side, full of gardenias, white roses, and lemon trees in clay pots. Before business took over the family, she said, this house knew how to bloom. The greenhouse was locked when she asked me to see it. The glass panels were dusty, the benches warped, and dry leaves covered the stone floor. But beneath the neglect I could still feel life waiting. Eleanor pressed an old brass key into my palm, its edges warm from her hand. "Keep it," she whispered. "One day, you will know which doors truly belong to you." I thought she meant the greenhouse. I thought she was giving me a project to keep my hands busy and my heart from hardening. So I cleaned the glass, swept the floor, replaced the soil, and planted the first tray of white flowers beneath a ceiling full of winter light. I did not know that tucked inside Eleanor's old gardening journal, between notes about pruning roses and saving seeds, was a folded deed that would one day turn every room in that house silent. The first time the Whitmore family tested me in public, they did it under crystal chandeliers with champagne glasses in their hands. It was the annual Whitmore Estates Winter Gala, held in the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel where every centerpiece was taller than a child and every smile came with a calculation. Ethan had spent the ride there checking messages on his phone, his black tuxedo sharp, his face unreadable. I sat beside him in a midnight blue gown Eleanor had insisted I wear, my wedding ring cold against my finger, my stomach twisting tighter with every block. "Just stay near me," Ethan said without looking up. "Answer briefly. Do not let Vanessa pull you into anything." That sounds like advice from someone who knows she is planning to. He finally glanced at me. "She is always planning something." The ballroom smelled of perfume, polished wood, and white orchids. My white orchids. I had spent 2 days helping the event team redesign the arrangements after their original florist canceled, though nobody except Mrs. Alvarez and Eleanor knew. Vanessa swept toward us within 5 minutes, wearing silver silk and that same soft smile she used when she wanted a wound to look like a compliment. "Grace, darling," she said, touching my arm lightly. "Everyone is so curious about you. Ethan has always been private, and then suddenly he brings home a wife from a flower shop." A few guests nearby turned their heads. I felt the room listening before it became quiet. Vanessa lifted her glass toward a large screen behind the podium. "Actually, I found the sweetest photo from before she became a Whitmore." The screen changed. There I was 6 months earlier, hair tied up, sleeves rolled, carrying 2 heavy buckets of flowers outside the Queen's Market at 5 in the morning. Someone chuckled. Then another. Heat climbed my neck, but I did not look away. Vanessa tilted her head. Before all this, she carried buckets for a living. Is that not inspiring? Ethan went still beside me. For 1 second, I waited for him to speak, to say anything. He did not. So I stepped forward on my own. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out clear. "Yes," I said. "And those buckets taught me not to drop things that matter." The laughter stopped. Not because my answer was clever, but because I refused to look ashamed. They also taught me which flowers survive bad soil, which stems bend without breaking, and how much work it takes to make a room look effortless. I turned slightly toward the screen. That photograph was taken at 4:58 in the morning. By 7, I had delivered flowers to a funeral, a retirement party, and a hospital room where a man wanted yellow tulips for his wife because they were the first flowers he ever gave her. So yes, I carried buckets. And I am proud of everyone. A silence settled over the ballroom, thicker than music. Then an older woman near the front began to clap. Another guest joined her. Then another. Vanessa's smile stiffened. Ethan looked at me as if I had become visible in a language he had only just learned to read. Before anyone could recover, a man from the investor group approached with a tablet in his hand and a frown on his face. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "we may have a problem with the Riverstone model." Ethan's attention snapped back to business. The Riverstone development was the project his board vote depended on, a luxury community planned on 30 acres outside White Plains. The investors gathered around the scale model near the stage, where miniature buildings sat between strips of artificial green. The problem was simple, but nobody in a tuxedo wanted to say it plainly. The design looked expensive but lifeless. Too much concrete. Too little shade. No real community space. One investor said the local planning committee would hate it. Another mentioned a delay of at least 6 months. Ethan's jaw tightened. Vanessa whispered something about hiring another consultant. I looked at the model and saw what I had seen in Whitmore Estate on my first day. Beauty without warmth. "May I?" I asked. Ethan turned to me, surprised. I picked up a pencil from the display table and began marking small changes on the printed site plan. A walking garden here. Native trees along the west side for shade. A shared greenhouse near the entrance. Flowering buffers instead of blank fences. A central lawn that felt like a neighborhood, not a brochure. "People do not fall in love with square footage," I said quietly. "They fall in love with the life they imagine having there." The lead investor stared at the paper, then slowly nodded. By the end of the night, Riverstone was not dead. It was better. And when Ethan walked me out of the ballroom, he took off his coat and placed it around my shoulders without a word. It was the first kind thing he had done for me in public. Small. Late. But real enough to make Vanessa watch us from across the room with fear behind her smile. After the gala, the house changed, but only in small ways, the kind of ways a person could deny if pride needed them to. Ethan still left early and came home late. Still answered calls in the hallway with one hand in his pocket and his voice lowered. Still kept the West Wing like a country with closed borders. But now, when I passed him at breakfast, he looked up. When Mrs. Alvarez asked if I wanted coffee, he remembered I took it with cream and no sugar. When Vanessa made another quiet comment about my temporary taste in curtains, Ethan said, "Grace has better taste than anyone in this room," then went back to reading the financial section as if he had not just rearranged the air around us. I told myself not to make those moments bigger than they were. Lonely hearts are dangerous editors. They can turn a crumb into a feast if they have been hungry long enough. Still, I felt him watching me in the greenhouse some evenings, standing just outside the glass while I trimmed stems, watered seedlings, and coaxed life back into the coldest corner of the estate. The old brass key Eleanor had given me stayed on a ribbon in my apron pocket, clicking softly against my pruning shears while I worked. Eleanor's health was fading by then. She slept more, spoke less, and sometimes held my hand as if she was trying to memorize the shape of it. "This house listens to you," she whispered one afternoon while I adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. "No," I said gently. "It is only quieter when Vanessa is gone." Eleanor laughed, then coughed, and I pretended not to see how tired the laugh made her. That night, after another tense family dinner, I found myself alone in the greenhouse with dirt under my nails and tears I had been holding back for hours. Vanessa had waited until dessert to mention that some women were born into legacy, while others were written in for convenience. Nobody at the table asked what she meant. Nobody needed to. I left before coffee was served, walked straight to the greenhouse, and started repotting gardenias even though it was almost 10 at night. Work had always been the safest place to put pain. I was pressing soil around the roots when the door opened behind me. I did not turn. "If you came to remind me this is not really my home, Vanessa already covered that." "It is me," Ethan said. His voice sounded different in the glass room, softer, stripped of marble and boardrooms. I wiped my cheek with the back of my wrist too late. He saw. Of course he saw. For a moment he just stood there, holding his black coat over one arm. Then he stepped closer and placed it around my shoulders, careful not to touch me more than necessary, careful in a way that almost hurt. She should not have said that. I laughed once, small and sharp. People usually say exactly what they think when they believe no one important is listening. You are important. I looked at him then. The greenhouse lights made his face less perfect, more tired. To the contract? No, the word came too quickly to be business. Silence settled between us, warm and fragile. Outside, wind moved through the bare trees. Inside, the gardenias smelled faintly sweet, like something trying to survive winter. Is kindness hard for you, Ethan? I asked. He looked away. No. Then what is? His jaw tightened, and for a long moment I thought he would leave. Instead, he sat on the wooden bench across from me, still in his expensive dinner jacket, surrounded by clay pots and spilled soil. Trust, he said. In my family, trust was never a feeling. It was a document, a signature, a condition buried on page 12. My father loved people according to their usefulness. Vanessa learned from him. I suppose I did too. I wanted to be angry. Part of me was. But there was something in his voice that did not ask for forgiveness. It only admitted damage. That explains you, I said quietly. It does not excuse you. He nodded. I know. After that night, Ethan began showing up in ways too practical to be called romance and too tender to be called strategy. He arranged for Eleanor's favorite tea to be stocked again after Vanessa dismissed it as old-fashioned. He repaired the greenhouse heater without announcing it. He sent my shop a corporate account for weekly lobby flowers, then looked almost embarrassed when I found out. And once, when Mrs. Alvarez's husband needed a ride to a medical appointment, Ethan drove him himself because the driver was unavailable. He did not tell anyone. Mrs. Alvarez told me. That was the problem with Ethan Whitmore. The man he was becoming was harder to hate than the man who had handed me a contract in a restaurant. But he still kept secrets. He still chose silence when words mattered most. And in that silence, Vanessa began moving through the estate like a match searching for dry paper. Eleanor passed on a Tuesday morning quietly, while the first white gardenias opened in the greenhouse. Mrs. Alvarez found me there at sunrise with soil on my hands and the brass key hanging from my apron. And the moment I saw her face, I knew. Grief does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it walks in softly, closes a door, and leaves the whole house colder than before. Ethan was in Chicago for a board meeting when I called him. He did not speak for several seconds. I heard traffic in the background, then the sound of his breathing changing just slightly, as if something inside him had stepped backward from the edge of a room. I am coming home, he said. He arrived that evening in the same suit he must have worn all day, his tie loosened, his eyes red in a way he would never admit. Vanessa had already taken control of everything by then. The funeral home, the guest list, the flowers. When she told me she had ordered white lilies because they looked appropriate, I said Eleanor hated lilies. Vanessa looked at me like I had spoken out of turn in my own grief. This is a Whitmore matter, Grace. I felt Ethan standing behind me, silent. Always silent when the floor most needed to hold. So I went to the greenhouse myself and cut gardenias, white roses, and small branches from the lemon tree Eleanor had asked me to save. At the service, the arrangement sat beside her photograph, soft and alive, and for the first time all week, Ethan touched my hand. Only for a second, only where no one could see, but I felt the apology in it. After the funeral, the estate filled with polished shoes, low voices, and relatives who had not visited Eleanor once in the months I brought her tea. They stood in her rooms discussing legacy like it was furniture to be divided. Vanessa moved among them with a planner under one arm, calm again, almost bright. That should have warned me. 2 nights later, while returning Eleanor's shawl to her sitting room, I saw a thin line of light beneath the library door. I heard Vanessa's voice first. You have to do it before the reading, Ethan. The longer she stays, the worse this becomes. I stopped in the hallway, my hand still on the shawl. Ethan answered too quietly for me to catch every word. Vanessa sharpened hers. Get her out before Margaret opens that file. Pay her. Thank her. Whatever helps you sleep. But she cannot walk into that office still believing she belongs here. My chest tightened. Then Ethan said, I am trying to protect her. Vanessa laughed under her breath. You are trying to protect yourself from admitting you were foolish enough to care. The room went silent. I stepped back before they could hear me, but the damage had already found me. Protect me. Get me out. Pay me. Every phrase folded itself into the oldest fear I had carried since the night I signed his contract. I had always known this marriage had an expiration date. I just had not expected my heart to ignore the calendar. The next morning, Vanessa placed divorce papers beside my breakfast plate like a folded napkin. Ethan thought it would be kinder if I gave these to you while he was on a call, she said. The settlement is generous. More than generous, considering. Mrs. Alvarez froze by the coffee service. I looked at the papers, then at the wedding ring on my hand. It suddenly felt less like gold and more like evidence. Considering what? I asked. Vanessa smiled. Considering you were never really his wife. I signed nothing. I stood, walked out, and went to Eleanor's room, because it was the only place in that house where I had never felt purchased. On her writing desk sat the sealed envelope she had given me 3 days before she died. The red wax still unbroken. Her words came back to me, thin but firm. Open this only when everyone in this house forgets who you are. My fingers hovered over the seal. I almost opened it. Then I heard Ethan in the hall asking where I was. His voice strained and pride, pain, and confusion all rose in me at once. I slipped the envelope into my purse instead. That afternoon Margaret Hayes called. Her tone was formal, but there was something careful beneath it. Mrs. Whitmore requested that all immediate family attend the reading of her final instructions in my Manhattan office tomorrow at 10. Immediate family. The words nearly broke me. Vanessa spent the rest of the day acting cheerful, instructing staff to prepare my luggage, just in case arrangements moved quickly. Ethan tried to speak to me twice. I walked past him both times. I could not trust his face anymore, because I had once mistaken his silence for gentleness. By morning, rain covered the estate windows, blurring the greenhouse into a pale ghost behind the glass. I packed one suitcase, placed Eleanor's brass key in the front pocket, and held the sealed envelope against my chest before leaving the room. Downstairs, Ethan waited by the front door, his coat in his hand, looking like a man who had not slept. Grace, he said, there are things you do not understand. I looked at him, at the man who had rented my name, warmed my shoulders, repaired my greenhouse heater, and still let his sister hand me papers like I was a problem to be solved. Then you should have used words before lawyers, I said. The ride to Manhattan was silent. Vanessa sat in front texting. Ethan sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the tension in him, far enough that he might as well have been across the city. And when we entered Margaret Hayes's office, I saw the smile return to his face, small and controlled, the smile of a man preparing for the clean end of a complicated mistake. He did not know the mistake was not mine. Margaret Hayes did not repeat herself. She did not need to. The words hung over the conference table like a chandelier that had suddenly lost its chain. The legal owner is Grace Miller Whitmore. I stared at her, waiting for the sentence to change shape, waiting for someone to correct it, laugh at it, explain it away as one more misunderstanding in a house built on them. But Margaret only slid the deed across the polished table until it stopped in front of me. My name was there in black ink. Not typed as a courtesy. Not written as a guest. Recorded, witnessed, notarized. Filed with Westchester County 3 weeks before Eleanor died. My hands felt cold as I touched the paper. Ethan rose halfway from his chair. Margaret, that cannot be right. His voice was calm, but the calm had cracks in it. Vanessa grabbed the edge of the table. This is impossible. Eleanor was ill. She was confused. Margaret looked at her over the top of her glasses. Mrs. Whitmore was examined by her physician and 2 independent witnesses on the day of signing. She was fully competent. Vanessa's face changed color so quickly I understood something before she said another word. She had known. Maybe not everything, but enough to be afraid. Ethan looked from Margaret to Vanessa. What did you know? Vanessa's lips parted, then closed. The gold pen she had dropped earlier lay near her shoe, bright and useless. Margaret opened a second folder. There is more. Mrs. Whitmore also attached a restriction to the surrounding 12 acres, including the east greenhouse. The land cannot be sold for private luxury development without written approval from the deed holder. The room tilted. Riverstone. The expansion plan. The quiet meetings. The reason Vanessa had pushed so hard to move me out before the reading. Ethan turned fully toward his sister now. Vanessa. One word. No softness left in it. She lifted her chin, but her hands betrayed her, twisting together in her lap. I protected this family. That woman was here for 6 months. That woman, Margaret said, her voice suddenly sharper, sat with your grandmother every afternoon while you sent assistants to check on her. That woman restored the greenhouse your grandmother loved. That woman was named because Eleanor trusted her. Vanessa laughed once, brittle and panicked. Trusted her? Grace married for money. We all know that. I felt the old shame rise, hot and familiar, then fade before it could own me. I had married for survival. Ethan had married for control. The only person in that room who had given without a contract was dead. I reached into my purse and took out Eleanor's sealed envelope. The red wax broke under my thumb with a soft snap that made Ethan flinch. Inside was one page, folded around a smaller brass key I had never seen before. My eyes blurred before I reached the second line. My dearest Grace, if this letter is in your hands, then the house has done what houses like ours often do. It has confused wealth with worth. You came to me without asking what my name could give you. You brought tea when no one brought time. You brought flowers back to rooms where people had only left dust. Never let them convince you that a woman who gives love freely has no value. I pressed the letter to the table because my hands were shaking too hard to hold it. Margaret waited, giving the words room. Ethan stood completely still. His face was no longer angry, no longer controlled. He looked stunned in the quietest way, like a man finally seeing the bill for every silence he had chosen. Grace, he said. My name sounded different in his mouth now. Not borrowed. Not arranged. Mine. I looked at him. Did you know she changed the deed? No, he answered instantly. Did you know Vanessa wanted me gone before this meeting? His jaw tightened. I knew she wanted the divorce finished quickly. I thought if you were away from this, away from them, you would be safe. Safe, I repeated. The word almost broke into a laugh, but there was no humor in me. You gave me papers through your sister. You let me pack a suitcase. You let me think I had been foolish enough to believe I mattered. His eyes dropped, and that hurt more than if he had defended himself. I was wrong. Vanessa stood so fast her chair scraped the carpet. This is ridiculous. She cannot manage an estate. She sells flowers. I looked down at the deed, then at the brass key in my palm, then at the woman who had spent 6 months trying to make me feel temporary. You are right, I said quietly. I do sell flowers, which means I know exactly what happens when people cut something living too close to the root. Margaret closed the folder. Mrs. Whitmore, legally, the estate is yours. The pending development agreement cannot proceed without your consent. For the first time since I had walked into that office, everyone was waiting for me. Ethan, Vanessa, Margaret, even the rain seemed to pause against the glass. I had the power to punish them all, to empty the house by sunset, to sign nothing, to let the Whitmore name choke on the pride that had built it. But Eleanor's letter lay open beneath my fingers, and I could almost hear her voice telling me that dignity was not the same as revenge. So I stood, slipped the deed into my purse, and turned to Ethan. The contract between us is over, I said. The humiliation clause still stands. Then I looked at Vanessa. And this time I intend to enforce it. By sunset, the Whitmore estate no longer felt like a place waiting to reject me. It felt like a house holding its breath. I returned from Manhattan with Eleanor's letter in my purse, the deed folded beside it, and Ethan sitting silent across from me in the back of the car. Vanessa did not ride with us. Margaret had asked her to remain behind to discuss the hidden correspondence, the delayed notices, and the development documents she had quietly moved through the family office. For once, Vanessa had no perfect sentence ready. When we reached the front steps, Mrs. Alvarez opened the door and saw my suitcase still waiting in the foyer. Her eyes went from the bag to my face. "Should I take that upstairs, Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked. I looked at the suitcase, then at the staircase, then at the long hall leading to Eleanor's greenhouse. No, I said. Put it in storage. I am staying. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second, not in relief exactly, but in recognition. As if he understood that staying was not the same as forgiving. The next few weeks moved like spring thawing through frozen ground. Margaret filed the final paperwork. Vanessa resigned from the board after the review found she had concealed Eleanor's instructions and pushed the land sale without proper disclosure. No police cars. No shouting in the driveway. Just signatures, consequences, and the quiet removal of her name from decisions she had once treated like birthright. The Riverstone luxury expansion was cancelled. In its place, I proposed something Eleanor would have loved. Eleanor House, a training center for women starting over. Not charity with cameras. Not pity wrapped in ribbon. Real classes. Floral design, small business accounting, landscaping, vendor contracts, customer service, and greenhouse management. We used the East Greenhouse for the first workshops and converted the old carriage house into classrooms. The first morning, 12 women arrived in borrowed coats, carrying notebooks, coffee cups, and the same guarded hope I remembered from my own worst days. I taught them how to trim stems under running water, how to price arrangements without apologizing, how to look a client in the eye and say, "This is what my work is worth." Ethan did not ask to lead anything. He did not offer money as a shortcut to forgiveness. He simply showed up. At first in a suit, standing awkwardly near the door with boxes of supplies. Then in rolled sleeves, helping repair the potting benches. Then every morning with coffee from the bakery near my old shop, cream and no sugar for me, black for him, tea for Mrs. Alvarez. He learned the names of the women. He listened more than he spoke. At the next shareholder meeting, he stood in front of the board and said what he should have said long before the lawyer opened that file. My wife did not take this estate from the Whitmore family. She saved it from what we had become. I watched from the back of the room, my ring still on my finger, my heart careful, not closed. Afterward, he found me outside near the elevator. "I am sorry," he said. Not smoothly. Not like a speech. Like the words had cost him something honest. For the contract. For the silence. For letting you stand alone when I should have stood beside you. I slipped the ring from my finger and placed it in his palm. His face went pale, but he did not argue. "That marriage is over," I said. "It started with terms neither of us fully understood." He nodded, his hand closing gently around the ring. "And us." I looked at him, at the man who had once tried to borrow my presence and was now trying to earn my trust one ordinary day at a time. If there is an us, it starts without lawyers. A year later, the greenhouse was bright with lemon trees, gardenias, and rows of white roses climbing toward the glass ceiling. Eleanor House had helped 43 women find work or open small businesses of their own. My flower shop in Queens stayed open, now with 2 employees and a waiting list for wedding arrangements. Ethan arrived every Saturday before sunrise to help unload flowers, terrible at pricing, decent at carrying buckets, and surprisingly good at sweeping floors without being praised for it. One morning, he found me in the greenhouse with Eleanor's brass key on the table between us. He was not wearing a suit, just jeans, a gray sweater, and nervousness he no longer tried to hide. "Can I ask you out properly this time?" he said. I looked at the man who had lost a house on paper and found a heart in the process. Then I picked up the old contract from the shelf, the one I had kept as a reminder, and turned to the line I had written by hand. "No humiliation. Not in private. Not in public." Ethan smiled, but not the old smile. This one was uncertain, humble, real. "I read the terms carefully," he said. So I handed him the brass key and smiled back. "Good," I told him. "Then pick me up at 7.